Do you find yourself feeling overwhelmed or confused when you're looking for somebody to help you, or even on social media as you're just listening to people share things? Are you confused by the credentials, the labels, the types of therapy? What's the best thing for you? It can be pretty overwhelming. And with social media, it is more confusing than ever. It's already confusing. The field of mental health and modes of therapy and all of that, who to hire, what their degree is, what their license is, all of that. It's incredibly confusing, even for therapists sometimes. So for the general population, it's overwhelming and it's impossible to understand all of it. So today I'm going to share with you some thoughts around that. Hopefully you'll find it helpful. If you're new to me, welcome. I'm Peggy, and I am so glad that you're here. Make sure to subscribe and click the little bell for notifications. And if you've been here for a while, thank you for being a part of this community. So it really can be so confusing. And in all reality, with the online entrepreneurial space that has just taken off in the last several years, in part the coaching industry and again social media, it's impossible to really be able to understand and really discern all the different things that you're hearing, all the different things that you're seeing. And I have found myself, when somebody says that they've got this certification or something like that, I'll actually look it up. If I've seen people who talk about being an expert in trauma, I will look them up and try to find out what their background is. Because unfortunately, without regulation in the online entrepreneurial space and in social media and in the coaching industry, it's kind of a free-for-all. Anybody can basically call themselves anything. They can do whatever they want. You don't have to have any particular training or education or anything like that. So it's very confusing. So there are a couple of things that I think are important. I'm going to talk specifically about types of therapy, like modalities. So I'm just making a note to make sure I don't forget that. And then I'm also going to share a little bit about kind of like why it's confusing or the kinds of things that you might be seeing. So what has happened, what you've probably come across, and this has been true especially in the last probably few years now. And I've done other videos where I've talked about this. I'm not going to go into it significantly here. But you've seen a lot of things with people calling themselves trauma-informed. You can watch another video for that and what that means and if it's enough. Well, short answer is no. It's definitely not enough. But when you're looking for somebody or you're seeing them post things and they say something and you think, oh, I never thought about that way, or something resonates for you, or sometimes it just reaffirms something you've already believed or want to believe. You don't know who that person is. You don't know what their experience is. You don't know what their training is. You don't know if they've have an education, if they're licensed, if they've had clinical experience. Unless they are very specific about that, you don't know that. But I actually am aware of somebody who, as far as I can tell, and I've asked people that have been in the coaching industry for a while, this person has absolutely no education or clinical experience in a mental health field. But he calls himself an expert. He refers to his clinical practice, but has no real training education. So you don't really know what you're getting, and that is really difficult. So when you're watching things on social media, I think that take what resonates and leave the rest. The challenge with that, though, is that when you have been struggling emotionally, when you doubt who you are, when you don't believe that you're worthy or deserving, maybe if you've been abused as a child, you actually believe that you don't deserve to exist in the world, that nothing can ever be different. if you hear something, something might resonate, but it's resonating because of the beliefs that you're already holding. So it's not necessarily the best thing, although it doesn't have to be a bad thing either, but it's just hard sometimes to discern, because if you believe that you're unworthy and somebody says, well, you just need to do this and this will heal all of that, that's going to resonate for you because you've probably been trying to heal for a long time. You're tired of feeling the way that you do. And so you think, okay, if I can do this, then I'm going to heal. And so you dive in and you do that thing. And based on experience and what I've heard people talk about, you may feel better for a little while because you're doing something, you're actively focused on something. And that typically is going to feel good because you felt a little hopeless before. But there isn't any specific thing that is going to help you heal. There is nothing that is going to help you heal quickly if you are a survivor of childhood trauma or any kind of trauma, really. So again, you might feel like it resonates and you're really drawn to it, but is that really the best thing? On the other hand, if somebody is sharing something that makes you think about something you don't want to think about, makes you feel something maybe you don't want to feel, you could find yourself really physiologically responding to that in a way as like, nope, not listening to that. That person doesn't know what they're talking about. Because you're not yet grounded in a space that allows you to be open to that. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a judgment, and it's not a fault or a flaw that you have. It's just where you're at that particular moment. Like you might see that same video another time and you might hear it differently. So it's not at all about you specifically. I'm just saying this to be aware that sometimes that immediate reaction is not necessarily hitting in the healthiest place. But if it resonates, if it feels good, then let yourself take it in. But before you dive all in with that idea or that person, make sure that you're hearing that from other people that you know what they're talking about, based on education, based on personal experience, based on professional experience, areas of specialty. I think those are probably the most important things. One of the reasons that I say all the time that it's important when you're working on healing childhood trauma that you're working with somebody who is clinically trained and experienced is for that reason. Because truly anybody in this online entrepreneurial space can basically call themselves whatever they want. They can build a business around anything that they want without any credentials. So trauma-informed is going to be one of the things that you're seeing a lot. And the problem with that is that it technically no longer means anything, because it used to, but it doesn't any longer, because people think that they read a book no matter who it's by, and now they're trauma-informed. People are saying that they're trauma-informed because they've been through their own traumatic experience. So it really doesn't necessarily mean anything at all anymore. Even certified trauma-informed doesn't necessarily mean anything unless that person is a master's level clinician. And when I say clinician, I mean mental health professional clinician. And I say there's a difference there because, well, actually, maybe I'll do another video on that. But certified trauma-informed, if that person is not a mental health professional clinically trained, that actually doesn't really mean much. So there can be some caveats to that, but just as a general idea. So then what do you look for aside from the clinically trained experienced person? Or even again, you're just following somebody, maybe you're joining their Facebook group or something like that. That's perfectly okay. doesn't have to be clinically trained. Again, just be conscious and aware of what you're taking in. So if you're working with somebody who is clinically trained and you're looking at all of the types of therapy that they might do, so you're likely going to see EMDR, CBT, DBT, relational therapy, somatic therapy, or somatic experiencing. Those are some of the big ones that are in the trauma realm. And there are tons of others. You might even see like Jungian or shadow work, that kind of thing. And shadow work came from a clinical person, but again, it has kind of become this thing, kind of like trauma informed, like everybody is doing shadow work. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but if you don't have the Jungian training, there can be some things that are missed kind of in translation, so to speak. So if you are working with a clinically trained person, then you know that they have a certain level of background. A trauma-informed, clinically trained person, if you're going for something other than working specifically on your trauma, then that might be enough. I think if that is the case, working with somebody who has some maybe somatic experiencing training and work, somebody who has CBT and maybe relational work, and any other sort of trauma training will be helpful. When you're looking at working with anybody around trauma, I know EMDR is something that is really kind of well known in terms of the initials and people thinking of EMDR and trauma. I've talked about my thoughts around EMDR before, so I'm not going to go into that a whole lot here. But the thing that's important when you're looking for somebody and you're thinking about EMDR, CBT, DBT, all of that stuff, if that person works pretty much solely with EMDR to help you heal trauma, personally, I do not think that that is near enough. And again, you can learn more about why I think that in another video. I'm trying to keep this not from being too long. There is so much more to healing childhood trauma than EMDR can do. So much more. So if EMDR is a part of their overall treatment and they have training in DBT, CBT, somatic experiencing, relational therapy, feminist therapy, theory, like those kinds of things, then probably fine. But if they say that with 6 sessions of EMDR you're going to be healed, probably not the best option. So cognitive behavioral therapy, in the last years, people have moved away from cognitive behavioral therapy, like the average person. And even like we'll see things on the internet where people are talking about, we've been doing all this talk therapy and it's top down and we need to be doing bottom up. And bottom up is more the somatic work. And in all reality, we are not either or. We are a whole person. Our mind and our body are equally important in terms of impact and healing. And so cognitive work, cognitive behavioral work is important. Now, if you look at my website, even when I was doing individual work with people as a clinical therapist, I didn't really say that these are the modes of therapy that I use because I don't follow any specific mode completely. I incorporate all of the important things, all of the things that I believe are important. And so you aren't necessarily going to see all of those things, but when you're following them on social media, when you're looking at their website, when you watch their videos, are they talking about what you think and what you believe? Are they talking about what's happening in your body? Because the somatic work is really important. But the thought process, what you believe, undoing that, deprogramming that, is equally as important. Doing cognitive behavioral work without that somatic work is only going to get you so far. It has to be incorporated. So the somatic work is the body work, and that can look a lot of different ways. There's different ways that people can do somatic work. And again, up until very recently, only because it's become kind of a buzzword, I've never really specifically talked about doing somatic work, but I've incorporated it throughout the entire time I've been a therapist. I just don't refer to it as, okay, now we're going to do somatic work. It's just a part of the conversation. It's a part of the experience that we have together. So CBT, and there's also, I don't remember exactly what the initials are, but there's even like trauma-based CBT, which is going to be good. There's acceptance and commitment therapy, which is kind of has some similarities to DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. There's a lot of mindfulness around that. And so that's an important part of trauma work. The somatic experiencing, and you'll experience a lot of that with people who might incorporate like yoga, massage therapy, particularly with a trauma-informed massage therapist. There's somatic work that happens there as well, when done intentionally. So CBT, DBT, acceptance and commitment therapy, so ACT, somatic work, somatic experiencing, somatic therapy, and again, how people talk about it, and this is why it's so confusing, because people talk about it kind of differently. But all of those pieces are important. Relational theory is really important because, and again, people aren't going to necessarily say this, but when you're healing, and you've heard me say this before, the relationship that you have with your therapist matters as much as anything else when you're working with a clinically trained person. In fact, when you're working with a clinically trained person, because they have some background, the relationship is actually going to be the most important thing that you experience in that healing process. Yes, you'll learn a lot, there'll be a lot of practices, but the actual relationship is where the majority of the healing happens. So relational therapy is an important part of that. Something that you've likely heard a lot is about parts work or internal family systems. I incorporate the ideas of that, but not specifically IFS. It's just a natural part when you're working with trauma survivors. You have to understand that, and that's been a part of my work for a very long time too. But like parts work, recognizing that there are different parts of us. I don't separate them out. I think there can be some benefit in that, but I think there can also be some aspects that are not particularly helpful in that. But understanding that there are different parts of us, not in terms of dissociative identity disorder. Obviously that can happen too, but that's actually pretty rare, generally speaking. But we do have these different parts of ourselves, and so understanding that can be important. So to come back and kind of summarize, I know that I haven't given you a really clear answer, and maybe I've made you even a little more confused, and I'm sorry if that is the case. That is not my intention. But what I want you to come away with is that the actual mode of therapy, if that person is clinically trained, has experience working with childhood trauma, as long as EMDR is not their sole or primary mode of working with trauma survivors, you're probably going to be okay. It probably doesn't matter that much what specific things they identify. As long as they've got the training, the education, the professional experience as a mental health professional. That's what's probably going to be most important. And I separated out the EMDR because, again, anybody who has a clinical license can do EMDR. Fortunately, the general population, that hasn't happened yet, that they can do EMDR. All the other stuff, the trainings that used to be where you had to be a master's level person or you had to be clinically licensed to take, for whatever reason, those organizations are no longer requiring that. And so anybody in some of the trainings can take that training too. And then they think that they're prepared to go out and help heal trauma. But again, that's an area that I'm quite passionate about. But with EMDR, a general therapist can take a training course, get certified, or I think it is a certification program in EMDR, and because of how it's marketed and described, think that they can heal people that have trauma solely doing EMDR. And recent trauma, adult trauma, is not the same as experiencing ongoing trauma as a child. It's not at all the same. It's not better or worse. It's not about that. It's just a very different approach. It's a very different understanding. And that's why if EMDR is the primary way that they treat trauma and they don't have a lot of that other experience or training like DBT, CBT, somatic training, understanding part work and that kind of thing, that's not what I would recommend. I'm just one voice, so take it for what you want. But I have been doing this work for quite a long time. So the relationship and the clinical experience, when you're working on healing trauma, when you know that that's really what needs the work. Now, if you are in a situation and maybe you've had some trauma in your life, but you are really just needing to figure something out specifically. You are like trying to figure out what you want to do with your career, or there's a family relationship issue that you just need to figure out how to handle in this moment. I still think a therapist is the best bet, but there's potentially a life coach that might be able to help you as well. But here's the important thing. Work with that life coach on that particular issue. Just like there are therapists who do solution-focused therapy. That's another kind of model of therapy. That's not something I would recommend for healing trauma, but it can be very beneficial when you're working on something that's very specific and short-term. Like you just focus on that and come up with solutions, solution-focused, where you come up with, okay, here's the problem, here are the solutions to get the desired goal. So that's what you do. And that can be beneficial when you're working on something very specific. But again, that's not going to help you heal your trauma. And I think when it comes to general coaching, it's kind of more solution focused. Not therapy, but the idea is more solution focused. So like if you're struggling in your career in some way and there's something very specific that you want to work on, I think a coach could be potentially a good place. I still think a therapist would probably be better if you've got that history of trauma, because especially if they're trauma informed, because they're going to understand that there may be something else going on there. And we can put band-aids on the thing that you're really struggling with right now. Like I can do that with somebody too. Okay, let's focus on this. Let's figure a way through this particular thing, short term. We can do that. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But when you've got trauma as an underlying factor that's really at the base of everything that you're struggling with, it's going to be a short-term solution. You're not really doing the healing work for the trauma. So I hope that that makes sense. If you've got any questions around this particular video or on some of the things that I talked about, feel free to leave them below and I'll address that. And I might even do another video to address a specific question. So feel free to leave that. And of course, if you have a general question you'd like me to answer, you can send it to Q&A@courageousjourneys.com. So thanks so much for watching. Again, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do so. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up so other people can find it more easily as well. So I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Have a beautiful rest of your day.